Deltarune Chapter 3 is the weakest chapter so far. That's what some people are saying online, at least. Now, I disagree personally, but I do see where these people are coming from. There are many valid flaws to bring up about Chapter 3. The one I see talked about most commonly is about the repetitive nature of the video game sections. Forcing the player to go through long sections of gameplay that they find stale can make the game feel like a waste of time, especially when there's a main story to get back to. I can understand this sentiment, but I don't agree. You know who does agree though? Susie. Before pretty much every single round of TV time, Susie has some kind of objection, the most relevant of which occurs at the end of the second round. When speaking to Tina, Susie essentially says that the reason she can't play in the next round of TV time is because they have to get back to the main story. After this scene, once everybody returns back to the green room, she says that the last game was wicked fun, but I get the feeling this will keep going until it gets old. So in-game dialogue that was likely written years ago by now is mirroring the complaints that current fans have about the game. The way I see it, this isn't a coincidence. I think that Chapter 3 makes intentional use of dialogue and broader story elements as a way to address specific flaws in its structure. Specific flaws that are difficult to fix without compromising Chapter 3's secondary purpose, which is to enhance the impact of Chapter 4. Chapter 3 is aware of its most important flaws and uses dialogue and some other stuff as a way to indirectly address them. Let's start with the technique that is easiest to notice, and the same technique being used by Susie's dialogue: lampshading. TV Tropes defines lampshading as the writer's trick of dealing with any element of the story that seems too dubious to take at face value by calling attention to it and simply moving on. Basically, when you're watching a show and something stupid happens and the characters go out of their way to point it out, or the show itself emphasizes it, that's usually an instance of lampshading. When lampshading is misused or used too frequently, as it often is in many movie and TV franchises, it can come off as kind of desperate to the viewer, as if the author has so little confidence in their work that they have to jump in to make fun of it before the reader has a chance to. When used correctly, lampshading can be a subtle way for the author to signal that they're on the same page as the viewer. It can also let the author regain control over a possibly immersion-breaking issue by making it on purpose, actually. Generally, by calling direct attention to a flaw, the author shows that they're aware of that flaw, and by extension, they imply that there is some reason as to why that flaw is not being fixed. It is through this implication that Deltarune is able to use its lampshading as a way to reassure the player. Shortly after Susie's dialogue at the end of round 2, we learn that the games we've been playing, TV time, trademark, were made for the express purpose of keeping the Lightners busy. TV time feels like filler because it is literally in-universe filler. It's literally designed to waste our time and prevent us from getting back to the main plot. But now, the characters have wisened up and are finally gonna do something about it. So instead of being upset at the game, now you're upset with the game's characters at Tina. I'll talk about this briefly, but I find it interesting how Chapter 3 can get away with lazier design choices because of its setting. You can throw in random minigames and cut content because we're literally backstage on a TV set, and you can simply cut between those segments because that's what a TV show would do. Anyways, I mentioned earlier that lampshading a flaw implies that there is a reason as to why that flaw isn't being fixed. Usually, that reason is either because fixing it would take way too much work to be worth it, or because it would be funnier left alone. Deltarune has another reason. The reason that Deltarune Chapter 3 cannot directly fix its major flaws is because doing so would harm Chapter 3's arguably more important secret objective. Chapter 3 of Deltarune is designed in a way to maximize its contrast with Chapter 4. Consider the difference in tone between Chapters 3 and 4. Chapter 4 gives us one of the most emotionally impactful scenes in the entire game so far, and then it does it again. Chapter 4 also reveals a ton of lore information, some of which relates to more mature topics. Chapter 4 is where Deltarune's story really starts to come into its own. In comparison, Chapter 3 is composed of almost all silly nonsense, aside from a few scenes in the very beginning and the very end. Chapter 3 is so immaterial to the plot, in fact, that as mentioned before, people feel like something is missing. Additionally, Chapter 3 is very similar in format to Chapters 1 and 2. It's a wacky adventure through a dark world, culminating in an encounter with that world's quirky leader. Chapter 3 largely feels like the logical extension of the previous ones. It's almost exactly what I, and many others, expected it to be. In contrast, Chapter 4 makes it a point to deviate from the formula at every spot it can. Instead of a wacky, lighthearted adventure, the characters are forced to confront what is probably their impending doom. Instead of going through one dark world, we go through 3 of them. And instead of fighting an eccentric yet reasonable final boss, we're fighting an incarnation of pure darkness and the prophesied harbinger of the end of the world. All of that isn't even mentioning the light world section of Chapter 4 either. I think that Chapter 3 follows the rules so closely so that Chapter 4 feels more impactful when it comes in and breaks them all. The contrast acts as a way to mark a turning point in the story of Deltarune. I'm confident that this was intentional, based on the way Chapter 3 ends. Right before the happy ending we've already seen twice, we're interrupted by the first appearance of one of the game's main antagonists, the Roaring Knight. Instantly, the stakes shoot up, the trajectory of the story changes, and we're thrown into the hardest fight in the game so far. I think that it is very clear that this scene, at least, was made to shock the audience. Something I find pretty interesting is that Deltarune is only able to do this because of the fact that Chapter 3 and Chapter 4 released together. Even though the intended way to play Deltarune will eventually be all 7 chapters back to back, that isn't true currently. Right now, each chapter drop is separated by 1 or multiple years. I don't think it would have been a good idea to give the fans a slightly derivative and lore deficient chapter to chew on for another 4 years. I mean, you can only drip feed your game's main plot for so long. This isn't FNAF. The paired release allowed for riskier writing plays to be made because it makes the quality of the individual chapter matter less overall. I also think the double release is perfect for getting the player used to the new direction of the story. I forgot to say it earlier, but I think that Chapter 3 will be the last chapter to follow the usual format. Something I did say earlier was that Chapter 3 was what a lot of people expected it to be, and I think that's a good thing. I think that if Deltarune went straight into something like Chapter 4 immediately, some people might be put off by the difference. Personally, I think those hypothetical people are weak and stupid, so good thing they're not real. So, Deltarune Chapter 3 might be the weakest chapter, but it's still a far cry from bad. I think that what Chapter 3 does for the overall structure of Deltarune makes it worth sacrificing a little bit of its standalone quality. Something has to be at the bottom of every list, and I think that Chapter 3 takes that spot with grace. Wow, what a video. If you want to be involved in the next one, then consider joining my new Discord server. I want to do more viewer involvement stuff like media submissions and especially guest voices. I want to do guest voices eventually. If you could care less about that kind of stuff, then know that I also want to do regular Discord server stuff like playing games and socializing. And that's not all. As a special bonus for you specifically, if you join now, you can see exclusive clips from the next video. So don't wait and don't miss this limited time offer. Join now. Use the link in the description, the link on screen. You can use the QR code or the link in the envelope I sent you. It should arrive in a few months or so.